Good morning to everybody, and welcome to the Mahoning and Trumbull Counties Housing Strategy Rollout. I'm Jim Kinnick. I'm the Executive Director at Eastgate Regional Council of Governments. Very excited about the turnout in person today. And I've heard that we have 35 online, so outstanding turnout, but credit to the group that didn't wander when we heard the weather forecast and made it in person. And of course, the weather didn't turn out quite as bad as they were predicting. So we're happy to have you here. Really excited about the genuine interest by our community leaders, our business leaders, to work together and create positive change in our region. I want to give just a little bit of background on the effort. Working closely with our regional partners, we recognize the importance of affordable housing in its relationship to economic development. The first question any prospective business, developer, or site selector centers around: where are their employees going to live? In response, we advertised and selected a consultant with expertise in housing to perform a two-county assessment of our region.
Okay, so this is the presentation.
Yeah. Because it's the Greater Ohio Policy Center, which I'm just going to bring up here in a minute to present their findings.
Okay, I'm gonna hang up, guys.
B24, gathering data, research in the area, meeting with stakeholders, and developing a strategy that is customized to our environment. I do want to stress, it's important to recognize here that this is a framework, really better yet, a playbook that will fall over the course of a year and years to come.
Support. Well, again, really appreciate everyone coming out in the weather. It is winter out there, but we are all here. So thank you for making the time. All right, so as Jim said, we were asked to do the regional housing strategy. I want to start by just introducing myself and my organization very briefly in order for you to understand where we're coming from, the expertise that we brought to this work. So Greater Ohio Policy Center, GOPC, we are a statewide nonprofit with a vision of a revitalized Ohio. We do research, we do policy advocacy at the State House, and we provide strategic assistance to local communities around the state, as we've done here in the Mahoning Valley. So as through a competitive request for proposal process, Eastgate selected us to develop this regional housing strategy. We brought on a sub-consultant, the Reinvestment Fund, to assist with the data analysis. So Reinvestment Fund is a national nonprofit, similarly focused like we are on creating vibrant, thriving, sustainable communities. They have a robust research department, and that was the department that we engaged for this project. I should also say, before I move out of introductions, I want to acknowledge my colleagues who were instrumental in getting this project done. So my colleague Erica Spade-Patras, I left her in Columbus because of the snow. Erica is on the virtual meeting, so if you chat in there, she will be able to respond. My colleague Javine Davis in the back, and I were the primary staffers, along with some other assists out of our office as well. Okay, so Eastgate tasked GOPC and Reinvestment Fund with developing a strategy or action-oriented plan that their local government members and their partners across the region could utilize, and that this strategy could be utilized at the individual sort of local jurisdictional level and leverages the power of the region. So we collected a lot of data in the beginning, and if you were here, many of you were here at our November 2023 or 2023 meeting, you were at our April meeting in 2024, you saw a lot of the data collection that we were collecting and getting your feedback on. So I'm going to run very quickly through some of those products, but really spend the most of my time talking about the strategy, right? The actual implementation. But in order to understand where those recommendations and the initiatives that we suggest that need to be initiated come from, it comes from this data here. So we produced 4 major quantitative data pieces using large data sets from census and federal data sets, and a lot of local data as well. And then we at GOPC did a ton of interviews and conversations and material analysis to make sure that we were understanding what's happening on the ground. All right, so Reinvestment Fund developed a market value analysis. And this is basically what the submarkets across the region look like in terms of your housing market. They used nearly 20 different data points, such as vacancy rate, income levels, to develop this fine-grained analysis. This is going to be an important tool in the future, so I kind of bookmark this for now, but we'll come back to it. We at GOPC developed a housing needs assessment, and that's we looked basically at what special populations like seniors, people with disabilities, single families with one adult in the household, what their housing needs may look like, the challenges that they have. And one of the major data points that we looked at in this section was looking at housing cost burden, meaning how much families are paying for housing and if it is becoming burdensome and potentially threatening their ability to pay for other services and essentials. Midway through this process, Eastgate asked the team to also look at how property taxes are being assessed in the counties. And this is situated within a larger conversation that's happening across the state, frankly, across the Midwest, in that property tax bills have been going up substantially in some neighborhoods. And there's been a lot of concern if that is being done equitably, correctly, and how that might translate into creating more housing cost burden. So Reinvestment Fund did the analysis for Mahoning County, and what they found is that in Mahoning County, houses are assessed within industry standards. But what they also found was that housing values have increased noticeably in areas that have typically been valued at a fairly low level, right, at a modest value. So those areas are feeling assessments that feel especially heavy. They are within industry standards, though, based on Reinvestment Fund's assessment. We have been unable to get Trumbull County data in order to run a similar assessment in Trumbull County. If we can get that data, Reinvestment Fund has committed to doing that. But for the time being, we are looking at how we know that at least in Mahoning County, yes, property taxes have gone up. But what Reinvestment Fund found was that it was not necessarily being heavily carried by one neighborhood and maybe sort of lighter touch in other neighborhoods. They found that industry standards were met across the whole county. Lastly, on the quantitative side, we in our office at GOPC developed a very rough housing market analysis. Now, our task under the strategy was not to do a full-blown market analysis where we say, your market can sustain 500 units at $400,000 or more, and those units should be here. That can be done, but we didn't do that at that level of detail. That was not our charge. But we did do sort of a housing market light assessment based on household sizes, income, projected job growth. And so this starts to at least paint that picture of what future development should look like, where we think that there are opportunities, and where we believe the greatest needs are going to be in housing. All of that data, right, all that quantitative data, we vetted with stakeholders. So we talked with many of you in the room, many of your colleagues, talked to over 125 people through the course of this analysis. We did individual interviews, we did group interviews. Some of you we talked to once, some of you we talked to a lot of times. We talked to developers, local government officials, regional housing service providers, economic development officials, and others. And much of what we saw in the data was affirmed through those interviews, but we also learned of new and exciting possibilities that are not currently visible in the data, but that there is energy and excitement about here locally. And that was that is an essential part of creating a strategy that's going to work for you all. Encouragingly, most of the people we spoke to believe that there is an opportunity for stakeholders in the region to work collaboratively, and that there is a willingness for everyone to roll up their sleeves and get down to business. And that acknowledgement bodes really well for the implementation of the regional housing strategy. So now we're getting into the what you all are here for today, right? The blueprint, the how-to. So we developed 3 major roadmaps for local actors to implement. And these roadmaps are not just for Eastgate's members, local governments, they're also for philanthropy, the private sector, quasi-governmental officials, nonprofits, and others. Housing is a complicated topic. It's going to require everyone to bring their unique skills and expertise, and we are pleased to hear that is the case, that there is that willingness here. So the first document, the first sort of how-to, is a guiding principle, or guiding principles for development. And this outlines tenets or principles that we think anyone who is focused on development in Mahoning Valley should keep in mind. There's 8 of them. We've excerpted 4 here. You'll see all 8 when you get into the materials. So for example, we encourage local governments and private developers to prioritize new construction to areas that already have all utilities in place. We don't anywhere say you should never do development in a greenfield, but what we do say through this document and others, think about what are the costs and benefits and weigh that, right? To think about what are the fiscal impacts of new development in certain places versus others, who all needs to be involved, for example. Another principle we discuss at length in this document is to focus on singles and doubles in addition to the home runs. And what I mean in the housing context is that I think a lot of folks here and across the state and elsewhere would consider like a new Ryan Homes development of 500 units a home run, right? That would be amazing. And we think that that is possible. But we also think that there's a lot of opportunities for singles and doubles where you have smaller developers, local developers who are producing new units at like 5 or 7 or 10 a year, right? In the aggregate, you're probably going to get more of those developers, at least in the short term. And again, in the aggregate, those new units are going to start to approach that 500 number. You've heard about the singles and doubles concept in other contexts. I believe a recent economic development study has talked about this. So this is not necessarily a new concept, but one we just sort of wanted to make sure to remind you all of as we start to walk through the actual strategy itself. So the principles for development are the lenses that will help you make strategic decisions about investments, investing time, money, land, resources, right? The recommendations, which we're about to get into, are the how-to part of the strategies. So we've sorted our recommendations into regional recommendations and local recommendations. And the regional recommendations are in their own module or chapter. You'll see them online. Because these are recommendations that are going to, one, require multiple partners to work together on, likely those who are already operating at a multi-region or at least multi-county level. And these regional recommendations, too, will have region-wide impact. The local recommendations are for individual municipalities and townships and can be implemented regardless of the status of the regional recommendations. Both sets of recommendations, the initiatives that we are proposing, are going to mutually support each other, but they are not dependent on each other. And that gives the flexibility for, at the local level, local jurisdictions that are implementing these local recommendations to move at a pace that's comfortable for them. As I said, will feed into what's happening at the regional level, but is not waiting on regional actors necessarily to launch something, and vice versa. Okay. So I want to first talk through the regional recommendations that we provide. As I said, these assume that there are regional actors who are leading the charge or at least stewarding this process, inviting others to the table. And these are the 5. I'm going to talk through them here right now. So the first regional recommendation we make is to create a housing consortium, a regional housing consortium. One that is that involves both counties in a deliberate, sustained way. And this regional housing consortium will bring different entities that care about housing under one tent. And the idea is to centralize conversations that are certainly happening, that we know are happening, but are not necessarily in a formal way talking with each other. So for example, we know that there is a robust network of mental health professionals, behavioral health professionals, and homeless prevention professionals that are meeting regularly in Mahoning County, and a similar group is meeting in Trumbull County. And there is some membership overlap between those two and some conversations that are regularly happening. Those all can be tied in together and then also tied into other conversations and efforts that are underway. So for example, we also know that the for-profit developers in the region, they talk with each other. There's an informal network. It would be great to have everyone providing what their priorities and needs are, making sure that there are opportunities to find connections and leveraging everyone's unique expertise and abilities. This is the forum to do that. To do that in the consortium, we have also recommended that the consortium be facilitated by a paid professional, meaning basically someone who is getting paid every day to wake up and think about how do we keep the consortium focused on solutions? How do we identify emerging needs, connecting those dots and moving ideas to action? We have seen these types of consortiums work in other places. I will say generally they are run by a volunteer committee, and so they sort of ebb and flow. And so we do think that having someone who is on salary or on a contract, again, stewarding this work will just help push things more forward in a sustained way, consistent way, and probably a faster way. The next recommendation we provide at the regional level is to create an emerging developers program. And I started to allude to this a few minutes ago. So these types of programs have been very successful in other places like South Bend, Indiana, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, elsewhere. These types of programs train individuals who want to get into real estate development. And so, for example, a tradesperson wants to become a general contractor, or a renovator wants to start to build new homes, right? Or builders want to get into land real estate development. These trainings may have like some construction procedure training, but is much more focused on creating the business side of those types of experts, right? So how to navigate building departments, writing business plans, properly setting up a company. And most importantly, most of these programs also provide access to capital, right? Because these are going to be untested or sort of tested companies who may not be successful candidates at a traditional financial institution, given their restrictions around risk. There are lenders, though, who are set up to provide that sort of lending and access to capital to these developers. As developers come, these emerging developers come online, they start building those 7 to 10 homes a year, right? There is a workforce development component here. There's new housing, right? There's building wealth for the builders themselves, the developers themselves, and the homeowners, right? If there's for sale homes being built. So as I said, we've seen this work elsewhere. We think that you all are primed to do that, and that this is something that can help you achieve those singles and doubles very quickly. The third regional recommendation is to help local governments adjust their zoning codes. So we heard this repeatedly in the interviews that we had. We also hear this across the state. So this is not just a like Mahoning Valley region concern. But there is a lot of variation across the existing zoning codes, and many codes have not been substantially updated recently. So that is at this point starting to limit the range of housing that can be easily built without time-consuming and at times risky variance requests. This, as a result, is having an unfortunate effect of dampening development activity, also like downstream decreasing affordability, and is fixable, right? And I think Eastgate might do a little bit of a teaser on how this recommendation is going to get implemented. The fourth recommendation we make is to create a down payment assistance program. And I should have said from the onset, you know, there is no silver bullet here. This is really about a silver buckshot approach. So a down payment assistance program where an employer helps their employees purchase a home by perhaps providing $5,000, $10,000 or favorable financing. Of course, this is not going to strengthen markets dramatically across the region, but it is going to be beneficial and positive, and in line with these other steps, going to really result in positive change. So a down payment assistance program, again, this is where private employers are helping their employees purchase a home. We've seen this work elsewhere. It helps employers recruit and retain talent. It creates stability in the workforce, right? Because employees have achieved sustainable home ownership. And there are plenty of programs nationally where this is working, and we've pointed in the module itself, we've pointed to some of those examples. Last of the 5 regional recommendations is to proactively assemble land. So Mahoning and Trumbull County land banks, and your municipal land development offices, the Port Authority, your CICs, there are a number of entities that already exist that have the ability to acquire and hold land. These folks are already in informal contact with each other. And I want to be very clear. This and a lot of these other recommendations are really suggesting formalizing existing relationships and processes that are already in place. For land assemblage, we are recommending that those conversations get a little more formalized, and that in conjunction with the housing consortium and the prioritized needs that will emerge from those conversations, these entities that are in the position to assemble land can start to do so. So you all have a lot of vacant lots, as many legacy cities do. It is hard to sometimes put a house here, a house there, a house there, and the sort of missing tooth, right? You know, if you have a neighborhood with missing teeth. It is much more attractive, particularly to an outside developer like Ryan Homes or Covini Homes, if you can present to them a 5, 10, 20 acre site, right, that is ready to go. These are the entities that are in the position to do that assemblage and to hold that land and to help the local government then put out the RFP for those types of developments. So this is, we think, again, is already happening in an informal way. We are suggesting it becomes a little more formalized and tied into these other regional conversations. Okay, so that's happening at the regional level. We've also made local recommendations because we know that we were charged with coming up with a strategy that helps locals, but then also leverages the region. So we've provided 35 recommendations that are specific to market types and specific goals that we developed based on the feedback that we received, and also the goals that we've developed in response to what we see are opportunities in the region. So these goals, for example, lower barriers to development or protect existing housing stock. I'll walk through all 4 of them here in a minute. But as I had said earlier, the recommendations are written in a way such that local leaders can work on as many recommendations that they feel capable and ready to move on. And while it'd be great for a city or a township to move on all the recommendations relevant to their markets, we know that resources are limited. So we've intentionally provided a range of recommendations that allow local governments, nonprofits, and others to lean into the different strengths that they have, right, to leverage that and to kind of help guide the decision-making around which recommendations to move on first. So there's 35 recommendations. I'm not going to walk you through all of them. That's not a good use of your time. You can navigate through them. But I am going to kind of give you a sense of what the actual product looks like, what it offers, and then you can go and check it out on your own time. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through what that module looks like, again, so that you have a sense of kind of the depth of recommendations and information that we've provided. So to start, you're going to go back to our old friend, the market value analysis. And this is already on Eastgate's website. You can find it there. At the end of this, and then my presentation, there's a QR code that'll zap you right there. Right. So the beauty of this analysis that Reinvestment Fund did is that it reflects true markets on the ground. It sorts the markets by strong markets, middle markets, and distressed markets. And you can see that within each of those 3 major categories, there's some variation, which they have also distinguished by different colors. And these markets do not necessarily, they are not following sort of like the census boundaries, right, for subgroups and census tracts. These are reflecting what is actually happening on the ground. So this is like more real than what you would typically find in any other source of data. So say I'm a council person in Campbell, and I want to know what the housing markets are that I have in my city and the interventions that are most appropriate for them. So I go into the market value analysis and I zoom into the geography I'm interested in. So here's an excerpt from Campbell. And I can see that Campbell has middle markets, D and E, right? That's those 2 colors. Those happen to be middle markets, meaning they're not too distressed. They're also not the strongest either. Okay, so now I want to know what are the appropriate programs or approaches for these types of markets. I'm going to show you that in a minute, but first we have to go through a detour, small detour. So as I said, there's 4 major goals that these recommendations are built around. These are the 4. Build existing housing stock and prevent decline, enhance existing neighborhoods and support existing residents, protect vulnerable residents, and lower barriers to development and redevelopment. So I am a council person in Campbell. I have these middle markets, and I say, I want to learn more about protecting existing stock and preventing its decline. So I will go to that. This is an excerpt from the module itself. There is at the front a matrix like this. So at a glance, I can see, can I do this? Can you see my mouse? Yes. Okay. So you can see middle markets. You can see this is the major goal. And here are 6 different recommendations that I can choose from. I can also go over here and see who all would be involved in that action, right? So is it local government? Do I need to involve nonprofits? We also at GOPC, in a very advisory way, please don't hold us to it, have mapped out what we think the effort and reward is, right? So it might be kind of a hard slog, but with high reward, right? Create and enforce a rental registry, for example. So as I said, I'm a council person in Campbell, and I want to know how I can protect my middle markets and make them even stronger. So I want to know first, how do I protect my existing housing stock? Okay, so I go to this goal and I'm like, oh, okay, here's 6 different options. Ooh, establish a homeowner repair assistance program. This sounds promising. I see that this type of program likely is going to include me or, my local government, but also nonprofits, potentially philanthropy. It's going to be a lot of sweat, but maybe a lot of reward here. And it looks like, right, so the reward, maybe that it supports a lot of residents, will really strengthen some neighborhoods. So from here in the module, then, you will drop into the actual text. This is the how-to, right? This gives you tools you need to start the conversations and start the work. I've excerpted just a few first few paragraphs of this entry, but you can see this is where the beginning steps of that implementation are laid out. So in this entry, we describe how this type of program operates in other places. We give early ideas on how to structure the program, for example, loans versus grants. The full entry is going to, of all the recommendations, provide you with enough information to start a dialogue with colleagues, and many include examples of success from other places. This is so that the steps and the outcomes that we describe will help local leaders decide if this is a recommendation they want to move on. Okay, so I'm still serving as a council person in Campbell, and I'm like, okay, preserving existing homes is good, but how do I get new development too? So I go back into the kind of the front part of the module, and I go to how do I lower barriers to development and redevelopment? We have lots of ideas, so many that we had to put in even subcategories. So, all right, so I see zoning. Oh man, zoning is we hear this all the time. We're hearing this across the state. As an elected official, I can help change zoning, but I see here that, hey, maybe I don't even have to, that's going to be kind of risky, but I don't have to do this alone. Greater Ohio thinks that the chamber can be involved, the regional governments, maybe Eastgate can be involved, and that there could be some really high rewards. All right, so what's in here? This excerpt is from the middle of the recommendation, and I wanted to show you that there are very concrete, specific directions, like permit a mix of housing types or adjust minimum lot sizes. I will say the local recommendations module can't get so fine-grained. We didn't get so fine-grained as to tell you in each jurisdiction, this is the specific ordinance language you need to change, and this is how it needs to be changed. We were not in a position to do an inventory of every single jurisdiction. But with the tools that we have provided you here with the market value analysis, you can see the markets that you have, and then you kind of choose your own adventure right through the recommendations. You will be able to come up with your own strategy in a, customized to your local community. As I said, there are citations, so that there also gives you all as the local act references to further find out more information, talk to folks who have been in the trenches doing this work. So I'm going to let you click through the market value analysis and local recommendations on your own, but as I start to wind down my overview, and then I'll open up the floor for questions or comments, I want to stress that the strategy assumes local governments, nonprofits, philanthropy, private sector, and others are working at the local and regional level and are working together. And I will say, I have been very excited throughout this process at how many people that we interact with who said, I am ready to contribute to this. My organization is ready, right? There is a real desire that we see of wanting to roll up sleeves, get the hard work going, and bringing unique expertise and talent to the table, with the recognition that no one entity can do it all, but that collection of expertise is what's going to strengthen and really catapult the housing market here. There are some long-term recommendations that will take a while to see the fruit of. We have
I'm on
also
your
provided
account,
recommendations
and when I open a
that
tab,
can be
see that I,
implemented immediately
sometimes-
with fairly obvious results
so that's,
happening.
I just
fairly
click
quickly.
that and it takes me.
So
Oh, see
again, we
there,
wanted to make
it let
sure
me
that
in, so-
we wanted to make sure that we
And,
gave you a range of recommendations, a range
Okay,
of
so there,
tools.
go ahead and,
We call them recommendations. These are really tools that are available in your toolkit to utilize, right? And that some of them are going to be longer term, longer, results that you're not going to see immediately. But like I said, we know it's important to start to build the momentum, build confidence. And so there are also immediate recommendations that provide immediate results. So here's the QR code that will zip you over to Eastgate's webpage where all of these materials live. I'm going to turn the slide here in a minute to the Mentimeter QR code and start taking questions. This QR code is also, I think, on the back of your agenda or the front. So anyway, if you can't get your phone to read the wall, don't worry, you should have it at your seat as well. But again, I guess I want to just close by saying we really appreciated the opportunity to be here, to be invited into the region, be invited to talk to you all, learn from you as much as we can provide information and expertise to you. We also learned a lot in the process. It was a real honor to be here. So thank you very much. Here is the Q. Oh, no questions. No, we want questions. There are no questions posted yet. That's what that means. No, we want questions. Please feel free to raise your hand. I think, how are we on time, Justin or Jim? How much time do you want to open up? Okay, we have plenty of time. So please ask your questions, make your comments, raise your hand. Folks that are on the virtual meeting, you all will figure out how to convey those questions to me. And then if you're here in the room and prefer to ask more anonymously, use that QR code and that will post a texted in question. So it should be yes, comma, questions from the audience, but at the moment we have not received any. Yes, good to see you. Do you mind standing up so everyone can hear? Sorry. Great. All right, I'm going to just repeat your question just in case folks on the other side. So the question is, do we talk about the role that local governments can provide in bringing down the cost of development because it is very high, the hard cost? Yes, I believe we do. Yes, I'm looking at my colleagues here who were more involved with the text writing. Yes, so we do recognize that the hard costs of development are very high, right? Just lumber costs a lot, labor costs a lot. There's just like immovable money. There's immovable costs. So we do address that. We talk a little bit about tax abatement, for example. We talk a little bit about TIFs. So those are some tools that can be provided. We also do provide in here information about state and federal resources that are available. So we are cognizant that it is expensive to build housing, no matter how efficient the builder or developer is trying to be. And yes, so there are some tools there. Questions. Have environmental concerns been addressed? I'm guessing maybe this is a question about like brownfields and environmental contaminants. If the person submitting a question wants to clarify. Oh, okay, yeah, please. Gotcha. Yeah, so in that guiding principles document, that's where we talk about, for example, as I said, encouraging new development to occur where existing utilities already are. So that land has already been developed, it's already lost its trees, right? The wetland mitigation has already occurred. So we, as I said also earlier, we do encourage local governments that are going to issue the permits to really think carefully about what new development on the edge of existing areas that already have utilities and infrastructure, weigh those costs and benefits. There's certainly an environmental component to that. There's also a fiscal component, right? And so environmental concerns and fiscal concerns often are mapping over each other in land use. And so that is one way that I think that local governments are going to start to think about environmental concerns. Does that? Okay, great. Who is or should lead the establishment of the recommended housing consortium? Dun, dun, dun. Stick around for the second half of the presentation and you shall find out. Okay, or Justin, go ahead. All right, so just to repeat, Justin, so everyone can hear from the mic, has the cost of infrastructure been addressed and or like prospective infrastructure? Yeah, again, in the guiding principles for development, we do talk about weighing the fiscal realities of long-term operating costs. So you all, like most of the state, are at the moment projected to continue to lose population through 2050. Now, that is not destiny. Those numbers can be turned around. There are active players in the region that are working actively to, in fact, make sure that doesn't occur. But at the moment, the two counties, Trimble and Mahoning, are like 77 other counties across the state that are projected to lose population. We say that in the guiding principles, and we say, so you need to think about, weigh the costs and benefits of new development and infrastructure development, because while we can potentially get grants today from the federal or state government to put in the infrastructure, that long-term maintenance cost usually falls to local ratepayers and taxpayers. And if you have a shrinking number of ratepayers and taxpayers, that burden is going to get higher in the long term. Now, that is, again, sometimes you make those types of investments because you know that there will be new ratepayers who will shoulder that cost. That is a calculated risk that needs, an informed decision that gets made. But we do say this because we want to make sure that this is as vibrant of a region as possible. And if resources are going to maintenance for utilities and infrastructure instead of other quality of life investments, right? It spreads resources very thin in the long term. So there's a hand. Oh, is that what I'm supposed to do? I'm sorry, Deb. Good morning. I'm interested where this might be happening elsewhere in the state and how it's great. Okay, so Deb, the awesome head of the Mahoning County Land Bank, asks about the Emerging Developer Program and where we've seen successful programs elsewhere. So there's several that are underway. In Cleveland, they a few years ago did a program that was really for like renovators who were scaling up into becoming new builders. That was led by Village Capital Corporation, a subsidiary of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. They found that very successful. They also realized that they wanted to scale up, and they had the infrastructure within Cleveland to do so. So now Cleveland has what they call the Equitable Development Ecosystem Collaborative. I might have rebranded that differently, but anyway, EDEC. And the Equitable Development Ecosystem Collaborative is a partnership between Cleveland Development Advisors and Village Capital Corporation. In addition, so Cleveland Development Advisors is a subsidiary of the Regional Chamber, Greater Cleveland Partnership, right? So they have the weight of the partnership behind them. That program is bringing folks who have done development, so they've actually pulled the permits, arranged the infrastructure, oftentimes at a single family level, and are moving them into multifamily development. So what I'm trying to point out just in that example out of Cleveland is that there's a range of sort of the target of the developer that might be supported. In Columbus, there is a developer program that that is, again, supporting developers who are doing multifamily, and that's at market rate, so that's not affordable. They are supporting market rate multifamily developers. In Pittsburgh, there's a program that's more for single family. We see land banks often utilizing and being a partner in these projects, providing land for the developers, right? So reducing costs there. But in some cases, actually farther down the line, using those developers or builders to rebuild on lots that the land bank owns, right? So instead of you doing a welcome home, you would contract out to a developer to do it for you. So those are some examples. And again, we think has a lot of potential here, given the history of innovation and the history of just, you all have a history here of knowing how to get stuff done, and that you also have the available land and opportunity and willing partners in place. Go ahead, Ian. Nice to see you.
Biggest impediment I think there is actually nice to know how we would make financial sense of many of our or about the days that they're proposing, make that work, whether it be I think something that's also needed over cost capital, discounted rate that helps us make stuff work. I think there are those even if it's something not out
yeah, so Ian's question is there are lots of folks in the room who know how to build, but the numbers have to work out. So what do we recommend to help the numbers work out? So so I guess two parts of a response there. We do talk about access to lower cost capital, and also capital that will take on quote unquote riskier projects, right? That are in neighborhoods that right now median home value is such that a traditional bank is going to say this is too risky based on our guidelines. So yes, we do talk about for that. We also talk about, as I had mentioned to Stephen, tax abatement and other sorts of tools. The other thing though is that we also are cognizant that those types of resources are finite, and that we can't, we're not going to be able to provide an investment on every single individual project. And so we felt that it was important to also really focus on how do you set the table? How do you strengthen the market, sort of the entire market, right? And so that's where code enforcement is going to be important. That's where the zoning changes are going to be important. And so that's going to have benefits across all markets, which should pull up some of these net markets that are struggling right now to get the sufficient capital. But I hear you, Ian. This is a hard challenge that lots of regions are struggling with. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Ian's follow-up was, are there examples elsewhere where the community has done a self-audit to realize how to streamline the process as much as possible and to lower cost? So Cleveland is in the midst of doing this to, I don't know if they would describe it as a self-audit, but certainly there have been components of that underway for several years, and we're starting to see, so in the aggregate, it's sort of starting to happen. We know that places in the South, like in Arkansas, I'm thinking of an example in Arkansas, an example in Oklahoma, where cities have done that because they have been in those cases, they were often trying to capture the potential of new development that was potentially coming their way. So we can provide that information, that sort of self-auditing, and then what are the steps that those places ended up taking. There are certainly, again, as in Cleveland's example, we know that there are communities around the state that are doing this, but they're maybe looking at one slice of that overall financing picture, right? So they might just be looking at the fees, so they might just be looking at zoning requirements. And so I think your point about kind of a global analysis is an important one. There's a lot of demands on our local governments as well, but yeah, again, we can provide those examples. Yes. Great. So the question was parcel assemblage and then ensuring that housing across the cost spectrum is still retained in neighborhoods. So yes, the parcel question very much feeds into that recommendation we made for the regional level of assembling land. And that, to your point, there is a lot of opportunity in the thousands of individual single family home parcels that could be easily aggregated into these larger parcels for development. So yes, we do talk about that. And then mixed income neighborhoods are preserving the ability for folks to continue living in the neighborhoods that they're in or accessing neighborhoods they want to be in. We do talk about that. We also talk about just ensuring that there are attractive neighborhoods that are vibrant, that people want to stay in and are neighborhoods of choice. So we do address that. I will say that a lot of the housing in this region is rent is increasing for sure, right? But there is still housing. We do talk about the need for affordable housing, right? And some of the tools to achieve that. So we do talk about that, and also the need to be strategic in where that gets located. So for example, on transit lines or major corridors, commercial corridors for their services and amenities that are accessible. I'm gonna try not to ignore the text, folks. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back over to the screen here. Are the recommendations presented for the region, assuming the region's population and demographic trends remain the same? As I said, we are generally assuming that population and demographics are going to remain the same or shrink to some extent, and knowing that that is not a foregone conclusion, because we are aware that there are efforts. We do think that the plan is flexible enough that an emerging need, right? A major employer comes in, needs housing for 6,000 new employees. The plan is flexible enough to accommodate that. Oh, sorry. Okay, have any neighborhood groups been involved in the discussions? Block watches, neighborhood associations, etc. Yes, so we have talked to local folks or folks who sort of represent local concerns. I will say a lot of our conversations were folks who are working with those organizations or those residents. But yes, we did also talk to individual sort of people on the ground, people on the street. Is the gap between new housing costs and comps required by banks for for-profit developers addressed in the strategy? How to incentivize developers from other areas to build in our market? I think I sort of have talked about that first question. The second question, how to incentivize developers from other areas to come into the market. This is a question that many regions across the state are asking. I have provided some recommendations and context to Guy, for example, of developers and home builders who may, who look at these types of markets and realize the opportunity that's here. But again, what we know is that developers from outside the region, particularly the big commercial ones like Ryan Homes, MI Homes, they need to see that this is not a risky market. And one way to prove that is to show that locals are putting in the investment and doing the work, right? So if you have that local ecosystem that is operating, that gives outside developers a sense of comfort, helps them make the case up at headquarters. The Ryan Homes is headquartered in Miami, helps them make the case at the corporate level. Shoot, sorry. One day I'll figure out how to work this. Infrastructure question, how does that address new businesses coming in? Site readiness grants for infrastructure only support manufacturing investment and not housing. Again, the principles that we provide are at the level of making fiscal decisions that make sense and making those risks and making informed decisions. So that the infrastructure question, I think, can get addressed by that. The site readiness grants, we at the state level, so our office also does advocacy at the state level. We are working with other housing interested groups, I would say, to encourage state legislators to think about creating a program that would help mitigate some of those investment costs, some of those infrastructure costs for housing. How are we on time? I don't want to run over. One more question. Okay. How about one more question from the room? New person, but then we'll come back. Tiffany, go ahead. Yeah, so there are, we do have that sort of landscape analysis. I don't remember if we've published it. We certainly have one in our office, right? So that will be shared with the consortium and the staff at the consortium, right? That's a starting point. To your point, some of these there are many programs that are already in existence, and we are clear in the strategy that some of this is about just increasing investment or sort of increasing coordination among existing programs. The example about the home repair program, there's very few that exist right now for like 120% AMI to 150%, right? So that was a middle market example. I mean, not to get in the weeds here, right? But so we are trying to not replicate or suggest something that's already underway, but really trying to fill in gaps that currently exist that we have found. So we do have, and the examples from the other cities, again, just in the interest of time, I wasn't going to go through all of them, but we do try to provide that. I will say it's been difficult because this needs to be a mile wide and like mile deep analysis, you know what I mean? Recommend strategy. So we have tried to balance that, but also will continue to be a resource if it feels like there's like something that we can easily provide a more concrete reference for. All right, I do not want to run us over. Yes, Jim, please.
I think there'd be more clarity when we move to the next phase on really how we're going to attack these full focus groups in the housing. The comment about some communities are much farther ahead than others, probably learn best practices to help communities start from zero and get moving, and then really having a regional function of zoning regulations. I do want to reinforce the importance of studying this, putting the plan together. If you want to take state or federal funds, you have to have a study with data that group compiled. And we're excited about moving forward, taking that state level for investment, take that certainly the country level for investment. It's very cool. We don't have a study that we're talking about, but this is very comprehensive. Some of the initial data is really needed for funding in advance. I think when we roll this out, we're going to roll this out from focus groups, and a consortium, like data to like I said. I do want to say, part of what we're looking at is investors, incentives. That was going to be talking about next. I know we're going to talk about that. We'll see that our population and jobs will be, we're not no longer losing, we're losing 7% a year for 50 years. We're not going to level that off. We hope to keep growing some of the investment into our area. Certainly good news coming for the next months. The bigger projects, we're excited about that.
Oh, I could have went up here, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I do think that there will be more clarity when we roll out and Justin's going to speak for us here from our planning department on our planning director on how we're going to take the information that we got and how we move it forward. It's really important to understand it's a regional approach we're trying to do. We're trying to raise everybody up. Some communities need to be raised a little higher than others, and we're excited. I think what also we're going to learn is best practices here too, and what we can be, how we can be more successful. So I appreciate the study. I appreciate the questions. This was great, and this is what's been very exciting to us in the last, certainly in the last 4 to 6 months, when we kind of get into the end and had more stakeholder engagement. I mean, the community's ripe to change, and we need everybody helping. We're not the experts. I'm certainly not an expert. I teased it 2 years ago. I never talked about housing, but I love the opportunity. And I think what's also most important, if we need help, we call on experts, and we have experts in the room when it comes to housing. If we need help, when we talk about zoning and regulations, how we can get communities to work together, we'll bring expertise into the room. If we need help to incentivize, to get investors, banks, employers for down payment assistance, we'll bring them in the room. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be successful moving forward as a community. So I appreciate it. With that, thank you, Allison, for your comments. Justin, our director of planning, and really the individual from our end leading the effort will now provide some insight on how we are moving forward and how we will grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, for basically giving my presentation. But luckily for the first half, he wasn't talking into the microphone. So for the benefit of the people online, I guess I'll give it again. No, really want to kind of reiterate what Jim had just mentioned. A big thank you to the GOP and RF teams for the work that they put into this. I think we really squeezed all the juice out of the orange, so to speak. So great level of effort. And just to call attention to kind of how we made this possible on our end. Eastgate, as many of you know, some of you are board members, some of you participate in our committee meetings, some of you kind of just pay attention to what we're working on. We're bound by requirements, just like most of you are. There is legislation that kind of guides the work that we do. There are grant agreements that dedicate our scope of work and we're allowed to focus on. And housing is a new space for us. It's an area that we've traditionally not gotten involved in because really was kind of outside those bounds. But with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, I think it's important to note that some of that language has loosened up. We're able to look at the linkage between transportation and land use, which has allowed us to move into this space a little bit more. And it's not to really be overarching or take over or have any sense of control over housing. It's only to provide technical support where it's most needed. So a lot of these questions that are being brought up as Allison's going through how to use this plan to advance your own goals, we want to make sure that we're providing that information that is useful to you and is beneficial to you and isn't kind of holding things back or kind of covering the same topics. But one thing I do want to make sure to call out, we have a great staff that has really taken this on and taken the charge to dig into this with kind of full enthusiasm. Tricia D'Avignon's in the back of the room. She's really been the point person coordinator. So as we kind of go through this next step of how we talk about implementation, she'll be the person you want to reach out to. No, but let's kind of dig in here a little bit, talk about the implementation framework. So what we're really wanting to build this on is a foundation of collaboration, alignment, and shared responsibility. It's structured around 4 key focus areas. Sometimes Jim will call those buckets. It's a real technical term, but we'll kind of mix some good terms in there. But what we really want to do is we want to address the most pressing challenges in our housing ecosystem and promote opportunities for growth and development. So one of the defining elements of the framework is the emphasis on cross-sectoral collaboration. Just because, and Allison had made mention to it, housing is not an issue that any one organization or sector can solve on their own. So this strategy brings together public agencies, private developers, nonprofit organizations, community stakeholders, to ensure that all these efforts are aligned and resources are maximized. Another essential component of the framework is shared leadership. So each of these focus areas we really want led by those of you doing the work. This isn't our game. We're not the experts. We don't know this best. You are the experts here, and we want to be the support to provide that capacity and additional assistance where it's needed and where it can best help you all do the work that you do so good, even better. So what we're looking at is a distributed model of leadership that ensures each initiative is guided by those of you that are best equipped to make it successful. So we want to make sure that there's alignment with the overall strategy, and that'll happen through regular collaboration and coordination. So making sure that we're talking to each other pretty regularly. And the other thing I think that's important to point out is we regularly produce these types of documents and plans, and for those of us that do that type of work, we like to think of them as more than just that. We want them to be sort of a commitment to working together, right? We want to be able to utilize these in an action-oriented way. We don't want them to be passive as just a resource to point to say, oh yeah, this said that at one point. We want it to really shine a light on how to get the things done. So we'll take a look at how we're planning on building out that structure and digging into that. So one of the first things, and it came up a little bit in the questions, is this idea of a housing consortium. So it's going to serve as the hub of our strategy. It's going to bring together all of the stakeholders, align all of the efforts, and provide technical assistance. This kind of intermediary body is going to ensure that the diverse perspectives of our region are continued to be heard and coordinated amongst the work that's getting done. As we build out this structure, it's a long-term focus area. This isn't something that we'll be able to flip a switch on, turn on overnight, and be up and running. So this is really going to be the primary area of focus for Eastgate moving forward, is how do we make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful and methodical way. We don't want to rush into something like this and make sure we're making decisions and including voices that are really required to make this successful. So as we start off with some of the smaller action items, and I use the word small, not in a term to describe the level of effort that goes into it, because truth be told, these are big items to work on. But in this larger picture of what a housing ecosystem can look like for the region, as we start the work, we want to make sure that we're learning how we can best work together, and then we can start to formalize how this housing consortium comes together. This thoughtful approach is going to allow us to ensure that the group is action-oriented and has established initial working relationships and found efficiencies through that first stage of the effort. So the last thing that really anybody wants is another recurring monthly meeting on their calendar that struggles to find its intent and purpose. So we want to make sure we do this right, and we'll work methodically through the bigger future of the housing consortium. So while we kind of park that in the further out future, let's spend some time taking into account some of those more practical implementation steps. So a lot of these are going to mirror kind of those regional priorities that Allison went through in her presentation. The Emerging Developers Training Program is an initiative aimed at cultivating a robust ecosystem of local developers across the Mahoning Valley. We've had early conversations with Valley Economic Development Partners, and they've been engaged as kind of an initial leader for this focus area. But I think the one thing to call out that's important to mention there is just because we've had conversations with them, just because they've expressed interest in this type of work, doesn't mean that there's not room for other people at the table. We're building these tables right now, and this is a prime opportunity to let us know that, hey, this is an area that we think we have a particular specialization in, or we'd be able to provide assistance in a very targeted way. So that we can start to build those relationships and start to build out that ecosystem from the ground up. So a key objective of this program, as Allison had mentioned, is to promote infill housing by encouraging development within existing neighborhoods. We want to revitalize the underutilized spaces. So as Arnie was talking about, how do we combat areas that have kind of declined a little bit, and we're seeing vacancy, this could be a key strategy. One of the other key aspects of this is it keeps wealth building opportunities local. And the program ensures that the economic benefits of development, such as the job creation, the increased property values, and enhanced community services, are kept here in the Mahoning Valley. This localized focus will support the broader goal of economic empowerment and resilience for our residents. So while this represents a strategic investment in your community's future, it fosters local talent, it promotes sustainable development practices, and ensures that the economic advantages of growth are experienced by those who call Mahoning Valley home, and not necessarily looking to outside developers for kind of those home runs. This is more of those singles and doubles that we've talked about. Moving on to regional zoning. So as most of you are aware, zoning plays a foundational role in shaping the housing landscape. And if you're dealing with outdated or restrictive zoning codes, it can create significant barriers to meaningful housing development. So that's why this is one of our key focus areas that we want to narrow in on. So this is something that Eastgate's going to take on to really lean into providing technical assistance and support. It will serve as a resource for communities that are looking to modernize their zoning codes, better align with today's housing and development needs. It'll include offering guidance on best practices, connecting communities with case studies of successful zoning reforms, as well as helping local governments identify opportunities to reduce regulatory barriers. So as we're having that conversation about costs and permitting, some of the things that make the numbers not line up, we think we can be a useful resource for our local communities to help have those conversations and talk through the challenges in updating a lot of these policy areas. One of the goals is to promote zoning practices that enable the development of a variety of housing types to meet the diverse needs of our communities. So one of the key data points that came out of this study is that there's a mismatch in housing size and housing type. So we want to make sure that the products that we're offering in terms of houses are meeting the needs of the people that are seeking them. So making sure that our zoning can be amenable to that and allow for that. One of our immediate focus areas will be on conducting outreach to local governments to assess their zoning challenges and priorities. And from there, we're going to provide some tailored support to help them take the necessary steps towards reform. We'll also work to identify areas where zoning adjustments could have the most significant impact on increasing housing supply and addressing gaps in the market. So this is going to come together in a number of different ways. You may see some kind of one-pagers or quick fact sheets. We may do some individualized looks at zoning, but we're also going to have some outreach opportunities, and we're working with a number of different organizations to already set up some educational opportunities for the region to really dig into the issues of zoning and then help our communities take that back to their offices and figure out the hard questions. So the next one is down payment assistance programs. And I wanted to keep this language in here. This slide really is bigger than just this one single topic. But as this plan was coming together and working with our regional partners, we've talked with the regional chamber a lot about this specific aspect. And they have a great relationship with our local businesses and employers that we think can make a large kind of movement in this space. So by partnering with those employers, a program like this will help attract and retain talent to provide employees with financial assistance to purchase homes. This initiative not only strengthens workforce retention, but can also foster community stability and economic growth by increasing access to homeownership opportunities. And of course, the Chamber is pursuing housing development beyond just this task. And we'll hear about that in just a few minutes. But the coordination between their efforts and the work the Housing Consortium will seek to facilitate speaks to the importance of that shared leadership. The Chamber's strength in advocating for new, expanded, or revised abatements and incentives, or their ability to interface directly with developers, builders, and financing entities will be important aspects to a functional regional housing development system. Next, we'll talk about proactive land assembly. So land assembly involves identifying, acquiring, preparing parcels of land for development. A lot of times we see this in the site development space for economic development purposes, and we think this takes a similar tact. Our county land banks and Port Authority are already leading the charge in this area, really narrowing in their focus and doing great work already. These organizations have significant experience in land acquisition, remediation, redevelopment, and particularly in areas with blighted properties or underutilized land. So by leveraging their experience, we can target efforts in locations where land assembly will have the greatest impact. such as neighborhoods primed for infill housing or areas near key economic hubs. So in the near term, our focus is going to be on identifying high priority areas for land assembly and collaborating both with the land banks and the Port Authority to create actionable plans for those locations. This includes cataloging properties, assessing their development potential, and engaging with local governments to align goals. And this is another area where these organizations do this better than anybody. So we're here as additional support and capacity and assistance when that call is needed. So really leaning on kind of that shared leadership, going back to that idea to make sure this is an effective pathway forward for us. One other thing is that proactive land assembly is not just about acquiring land, it's about creating the opportunities for sustainable and impactful development. So by taking these steps, we're kind of laying the groundwork for a stronger housing market altogether as we look to utilize the land that is available. So for this next slide, I'd like to take a pause from me talking and introduce the president and CEO of the Youngstown Warren Regional Chamber to kind of give a little bit more detail on what the chamber is working on and digging into related to housing development. So Guy, feel free to have the floor.
So thank you, Justin. And I want to start by thanking Eastgate. It was about 2 years ago when we were getting concerns expressed by our employers that their workers are not finding homes here. They're having to live too far away. We realized that we were creating jobs, but the real benefit of those jobs were taking place in places like Hudson and Cranberry, where the workers were finding homes, paying taxes, sending their kids to schools, and spending money. And so Eastgate heard that and didn't just hear it, they took action, brought on Greater Ohio Policy Center, Investment Fund, and it resulted in this. So thank you, Eastgate, for being so responsive to the needs of the business community. Go over what we are doing in terms of our role in a little bit more detail. We have, while all this has been going on for the past year or so with GOPC, we've been assembling what we're going to call a housing council of our board of directors. And these include, and some of you in this room are on that council, but it's developers, it's builders, it's lenders, it's investors, it's landowners, and it's employers, all coming together to work out some of those ways that we can make this affordable so that we can have an increase in the housing stock here. Over that time, that group sort of informally has come up with, I think, over $100 million worth of investment ready to be deployed, whether that's soft money, down payment assistance, lower interest rates, and so forth, or hard money, groups that are ready to invest, ready to build, ready to rehab. That's all coming together very nicely. It includes emerging developers that will work with Valley Partners. It includes reusing land where there's existing infrastructure. It includes Ryan Homes, which I heard you mention many times on this. We'll also focus on public policy changes, especially at the state level, to make sure that policies addressing our circumstances, which are unique in the Valley, are being considered when establishing those policies. We know that housing is going to be a priority of the new General Assembly, Columbus, and as soon as tomorrow, you might see the first housing bill dropped. And so rest assured, we are working very closely with the legislators to make sure our unique situations are going to be in that when it finally comes to passage. We are already engaged with the new Lake to River caucus of the General Assembly, and that's the state senators and representatives in the 4 counties that represent the Lake to River region, to make sure that they are carrying our unique circumstances in that legislation. One of the ones that I'll allude to here that might be unique to us as an example, and not so much other communities, Allison's and GOPC's report indicates that we have an overstock of 3 or 4-bedroom housing, but an understock of studio 1 and 2-bedroom housing. That might not exist in other places. So we need to make sure that as the state and federal government have housing priorities and policies, our unique circumstances are written into that. And lastly, another component of what we're doing, we last year created new business advisory council of the Fed to represent 4 counties here. And in that way, real-time anecdotal data on the ground here, qualitative gets fed up to Washington. And in our circumstances are taken into consideration when the Fed creates monetary policy. A significant amount of the Fed's monetary policy is around housing. And so we even have a builder from the community that's on that new business advisory council of the Fed. So lots of different ways that we are approaching this. We work very closely with all the partners like Eastgate to make sure that over the next 5 years or so, we increase the housing stock that matches the job creation that we're experiencing. So thank you. One of the, I guess, most I'll call it aggressive or enthusiastic or helpful partners in what we've been doing has been 717 Credit Union. And so when we put our housing council together, it will be chaired by its president and CEO, John Demler. And they've already deployed significant opportunities in our urban cores and look to do more so. And so we're very happy to be partnering with them. And so I'd like to call up John, President and CEO of 717 Credit Union. John.
Thank you, Guy. Guy and I have been talking about the housing strategy for really the past year, and 717 is really excited to participate in this. But we know that this is something that requires all organizations, all financial institutions, all developers to make successful. This past October, 717's board of directors voted to commit $100 million in community reinvestment dollars specifically for housing initiatives in Northeast Ohio. We've already put together programs, a $7 million program in Warren for a facade renovation. We're partnering with the city of Youngstown for a $3 million facade renovation, a $2 million landlord renovation program, and a $35 million new construction program that will focus on infill housing as well as revitalizing the urban core. Today was also mentioned initiatives for employer down payment assistance, and that's something that we'll be engaged in those efforts as well. And I look forward to working with the council and Eastgate and GOPC on advancing the housing strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy, John. Very helpful information to kind of help set the stage for how we move forward for this type of work. And before I release you all back to the snow globe, just want to summarize a few things. So the localized and regional recommendations, I think, are immensely helpful. The other document that I think is really maybe the hidden star in all of this work is the principles for development as well, because it really underscores how we make this sustainable in a way that doesn't over leverage our community's ability to be able to put housing units on the market and manage the infrastructure needs that come along with them. So just to summarize kind of what we've walked through and how we're kind of casting this next stage is our first priority is really to take seriously that housing consortium, right? We know that this is a longer term effort, but we're going to start building that platform and building the stage. And it's going to require a lot of assistance and coordination amongst all of you and people even beyond this room and the folks that are joining us virtually. So look for a lot more information to come out of our office and our communication channels to be sharing. And over time, that consortium is going to grow into an impactful resource. The second priority, really that I think we're most excited to see kind of get some momentum behind it, is that emerging developers training program. program. Something that really kind of came up during this entire process, and when it was mentioned, there was a lot of energy and interest behind it. So really encouraged by the conversations that have happened thus far to get us to this point. And if any of you are interested in being a part of that process, please reach out and let us know, and we'll make sure to connect you in, because the more people focused on that project, the better the outcome will be. And lastly, we're going to continue, as always, it's core to our mission at Eastgate to work with our local governments, but we're also expanding that with this new viewpoint. So we want to have some engagement with developers and advocacy groups to address zoning and land use policies. The outdated zoning codes are a common barrier to housing. You see it in a lot of communities across the country. We know that we can fix them. We know that we can address them. It will take work, but we know it's not unsurmountable. So looking forward to working with all of you as we move into this next phase. Now that we have the strategy, we can't just rest on that. We really do have to make this an action-oriented process, and it becomes a lot easier when we have friends along the way. So with that, I will allow you to navigate back out into the winter wonderland that is Northeast Ohio. But thank you all for your attendance, your questions, and your engagement throughout this process. We look forward to a lot more moving forward. Thank you.